The Infinite Return, Awakening to Oneness and the Dissolution of the Self, by Anthony Hubka. Introduction, The Illusion of Separation. Every day, we live in a world that reinforces the idea of separateness. From the moment we are born, we are taught to distinguish between me and you, between self and other. We learn to divide the world into categories, identities, and labels, rich and poor, successful and unsuccessful, beautiful and flawed, us and them. These distinctions shape the way we think, act, and feel, leading us to believe that we are isolated individuals navigating through a disconnected world. But what if this separation is an illusion? What if the very foundation of our lives, this belief that we are separate from everything around us, is fundamentally flawed? This book is an exploration of that possibility. It is a journey into the idea that we are all connected, not just in a metaphorical or philosophical sense, but in a profound, tangible way. The air you breathe, the thoughts you think, the actions you take, all of these are part of an intricate web of interconnection that binds every living being together. The concept of oneness is not new. It has been central to many spiritual traditions, from Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism to indigenous wisdom that speaks of all life as interconnected. But in the fast-paced materialistic world we live in today, this wisdom has been largely forgotten. We have become so focused on individual success, personal identity, and competition that we have lost sight of the bigger picture, the truth that we are all part of something much larger than ourselves. This book is an invitation to rediscover that truth. It will guide you through a journey of self-exploration and reflection, helping you peel away the layers of conditioning that keep you trapped in the illusion of separateness. It will offer practical exercises, meditations, and insights that will help you experience the oneness of life directly, not just as a concept, but as a lived reality. By the end of this journey, you may find that your sense of self has expanded beyond the boundaries of your body and mind. You may come to realize that the I you have always identified with is just one small part of a much greater whole, a whole that includes not only other people, but also the earth, the sky, the animals, and the entire universe. Chapter 1. The Illusion of the Self. What is the self? Who are you, really? These questions have been asked by mystics, philosophers, and seekers for centuries, yet the answer continues to elude most of us. From the moment we are born, we begin to construct an identity. We are given a name, and with that name comes the sense of who we are. We are taught to identify with our body, our thoughts, our memories, and the roles we play in the world. But what if this sense of self, this I, that feels so real, is nothing more than an illusion? To begin unraveling the illusion of the self, let's start with the most obvious layer: your name. Your name is the first label you are given, the foundation upon which the rest of your identity is built. When someone calls your name, you respond. You say, "This is me." But is your name really you? If you were to change your name tomorrow, would you cease to exist? Of course not. The name is just a label, a symbol used to refer to you. It has no real connection to the essence of who you are. But perhaps you think, I am not just my name. I am my body. After all, the body is tangible, something you can see and touch. It seems logical to identify with it. You look in the mirror, and the image staring back feels like you. But is it? Consider this. The body is in a state of constant change. Cells die and regenerate, skin sheds, hair grows and falls out. Every 7 years or so, nearly every cell in your body has been replaced. The body you inhabited as a child no longer exists. It has completely transformed. If your body is constantly changing, how can it be the solid, unchanging self you believe it to be? Furthermore, you have little control over your body. Your heart beats without your conscious input. Your lungs breathe without you having to think about it, and your cells divide and repair themselves without your direction. You may inhabit this body, but do you really control it? Or are you simply witnessing it? This leads to the deeper question. If you are not your body, then who are you? Some might argue, I am my thoughts. After all, the mind feels more intimate, more personal than the body. It's the place where our sense of identity seems to reside. But when we examine the nature of thought, we find that it too is fleeting. Thoughts arise, linger for a moment, and then fade away, replaced by new ones. They are like clouds drifting across the sky, constantly moving, never staying in one place for long. If you observe your mind, you'll notice that your thoughts are often contradictory. One moment you might think, I'm happy, and the next, I'm sad. You might believe one thing today and something entirely different tomorrow. Your thoughts are shaped by your experiences, your emotions, and the external world. They are not fixed, and they are certainly not permanent. So, how can something as transient and changeable as thought be the true you? Moreover, if you were truly your thoughts, then what happens in moments of silence? When the mind is quiet, perhaps when you are lost in a beautiful moment, absorbed in nature, or deep in meditation, does the self disappear? No, you remain. You are still present, still aware, even when thoughts are absent. What remains when the thoughts dissolve? This brings us to the realization that you are not your thoughts, just as you are not your body or your name. The self you identify with is a construct, a mental narrative pieced together from memories, beliefs, and experiences. But it is not who you really are. The self is like a mask you wear, a role you play in the theater of life. But behind that mask, there is something far deeper, something more essential. What remains, beyond the body and the mind, is awareness. Awareness is the silent witness that has been with you through every experience, every thought, and every emotion. It is the unchanging presence that observes the ever-changing landscape of your life. This awareness is not bound by identity, nor is it limited by form. It is infinite, timeless, and beyond the confines of the ego. You have likely experienced glimpses of this awareness throughout your life, though you may not have recognized it. These moments often arise in times of stillness or profound connection. Perhaps you felt it while watching a sunset, standing in awe of nature, or holding a newborn baby. In these moments, the boundaries between self and other seem to dissolve, and there is only the pure experience of being. This is the awareness that lies beneath the layers of identity, the awareness that is your true nature. But why is it that we so rarely experience this deeper self? Why do we remain trapped in the illusion of separation, clinging to the false self as if it were real? The answer lies in the ego. The ego is the part of the mind that creates and maintains the illusion of the separate self. It is the voice in your head that says, I am this, I am that. It defines itself by what it possesses, what it believes, and how it compares to others. The ego thrives on distinction, on creating boundaries between me and not me. It needs to feel special, to feel separate, in order to survive. But the ego is not the true self. It is a construct, a mental habit formed over years of conditioning. From a young age, we are taught to build and strengthen the ego. We are told who we are, how to behave, and what to strive for. We are given roles to play: child, student, adult, worker, parent. And we become so identified with these roles that we forget who we are beneath them. The ego clings to the belief that it is in control, that it is the master of its fate. But this belief is a lie. The ego is not in control. It is constantly reacting to external circumstances, seeking validation, and defending itself against perceived threats. It is driven by fear, fear of failure, fear of rejection, and ultimately, fear of death. The ego knows that it is fragile, and it will do anything to preserve its existence. But the ego is built on a foundation of illusion. It creates the illusion of separation, convincing you that you are an isolated individual, cut off from the rest of existence. It builds walls between you and others, between you and the world, and as long as you believe in the ego's narrative, you will remain trapped in the illusion of separateness. The truth, however, is that there is no separation. The boundaries the ego creates are artificial. In reality, everything is connected. You are not a separate self, distinct from the world around you. You are an expression of the same consciousness that animates all of existence. This realization is not just an intellectual understanding. It is a profound shift in perception, a dissolution of the boundaries that the ego has constructed. When you begin to see through the illusion of the self, you experience a deep sense of unity, a recognition that you are not a separate individual, but part of a vast, interconnected whole. Expanded reflection. Take a few moments to sit in stillness. Close your eyes and bring your attention to your breath. As you breathe in, feel the air entering your lungs, nourishing your body. As you breathe out, feel the air leaving your body, merging with the atmosphere around you. Recognize that the breath is not separate from you. It is a continuous exchange between your body and the world. In this moment, ask yourself, who is breathing? Who is aware of the breath? Let the question sink in, without needing to find an immediate answer. Allow yourself to rest in the silence, beyond the mind's need for explanation. Chapter Conclusion: The Cracks in the Illusion. In this first chapter, you have begun to question the very foundation of your identity. You have seen that the self you have always believed in is not as solid as it seems. Your name, your body, your thoughts, none of these things are the true you. They are merely layers of identity, temporary forms that the ego clings to in order to maintain the illusion of separateness. But as you peel back these layers, cracks begin to form in the illusion. And through those cracks, a deeper truth starts to emerge, a truth that cannot be grasped by the mind, but only experienced through direct awareness. This is just the beginning of the journey. The deeper you go, the more you will uncover the falsehood of the ego, and the greater your understanding of oneness will become. The next step is to move beyond the body and mind altogether, and to awaken to the realization that you are not an individual at all. You are consciousness itself, boundless and infinite. Chapter 2: Beyond the Body and Mind. We've begun to see that the self you have always identified with is not as real as it seems. You are not your name, nor are you your body or your thoughts. But to truly awaken to this truth, we must go even deeper. We must go beyond the body and the mind, beyond the very notion of individuality itself. Let's begin with the body. The body feels undeniably real. It is the vehicle through which you move through the world, the vessel that gives you the experience of physical existence. You experience pleasure and pain, warmth and cold, hunger and satisfaction, all through the sensations of the body. It seems so natural to say, "This is my body," to identify with its movements, its shape, and its limits. But what happens when we start to investigate the nature of the body more closely? The ever-changing body. The first thing you notice when you examine the body is that it is in a state of constant change. From the moment of birth, the body is transforming. Cells are continuously dying and regenerating. Skin sheds, hair grows and falls out, muscles build and weaken. The body you had as a child is not the body you have now, and the body you inhabit today will not be the body you have a year from now. If the body is constantly changing, how can it be the foundation of who you are? How can it be the stable self you cling to when it is so clearly impermanent? In fact, the body is not so much a thing as it is a process, a collection of biological systems that interact with the environment in complex and dynamic ways. You are not in control of these processes. Your heart beats without your direction. Your lungs breathe automatically, and your cells replicate without your awareness. You inhabit this body, but you do not control it in the way you might think. And yet, we still believe that the body defines us. We attach labels to it, male or female, strong or weak, healthy or ill, and these labels become part of our identity. But these labels, like the body itself, are fluid. They are stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a constantly changing reality. If you were to lose an arm, would you be any less you? If your body became paralyzed, would your sense of self vanish? No. These physical changes might alter your experience, but they do not touch the deeper essence of who you are. The body is simply the form through which you experience life in this moment, but it is not your true self. The body and the world are one. Even more profound is the realization that the body is not truly separate from the world around it. Consider this. The air you breathe enters your lungs and nourishes your cells. The food you eat becomes part of your body, fueling its functions and building its structure. The water you drink flows through your bloodstream, hydrating your tissues. Your body is not an isolated entity. It is in constant exchange with the environment. Every part of your body is made from the elements of the earth, the same elements that form the trees, the rivers, the animals, and the sky. The atoms in your body once existed in stars, in oceans, in other living beings. The boundary between your body and the world is not as fixed as it appears. Your body is a temporary manifestation of the same substance that makes up everything in the universe. To say, "This is my body," is like saying, "This wave in the ocean is mine." Just as a wave is a temporary form in the ocean, your body is a temporary form within the vast ocean of existence. It arises, takes shape, and eventually dissolves back into the whole. This realization can be both liberating and unsettling. It challenges the deeply ingrained belief that you are a separate, solid entity. But when you let go of this belief, you begin to see the deeper truth. You are not your body. You are the awareness that witnesses the body, that experiences the sensations and movements of the body, but you are not confined to it. Reflection. Close your eyes and feel into your body. Notice the sensations without labeling them. Feel your breath entering and leaving, your heart beating, your skin against your clothes. Now, bring your attention to the space around your body. Is there a clear boundary between your body and the air? Or do the sensations of the body blend seamlessly with the space around it? Allow yourself to feel the continuity between your body and the world, recognizing that the separation between you and the world is an illusion. Beyond the mind. If you are not your body, then perhaps you are your mind, your thoughts, memories, emotions, and beliefs. This is the second layer of the illusion, the mental construct that gives you a sense of continuity and identity. After all, your thoughts feel deeply personal. They are the internal dialogue that narrates your life, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and how the world works. But are you really your thoughts? Consider this. Thoughts come and go, often without your control. One moment you are thinking about what you'll have for dinner. The next moment you are replaying a memory from childhood. And then suddenly you are daydreaming about the future. Thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of your mind, constantly shifting, never staying in one place for long. If you were your thoughts, you would be as transient and unstable as they are. You would disappear every time a thought disappeared. But that's not what happens. When a thought fades, you remain. You are still present, still aware, even when your mind is silent. The nature of thought. When we examine the nature of thought, we begin to see that thoughts are not as personal as we believe. They are conditioned by your past experiences, by your upbringing, by your environment. They arise in response to external stimuli or internal triggers, but they are not under your control. You don't choose to think most of your thoughts. They simply appear. If you sit quietly and observe your mind, you will notice that thoughts seem to have a life of their own. They arise spontaneously, without your intention. Some thoughts are random, some are repetitive, and some seem to come out of nowhere. This suggests that thoughts are not yours in the way you might have assumed. They are not a reflection of who you are. They are simply events happening in the mind. Furthermore, thoughts are not always reliable. They are often contradictory, irrational, and influenced by emotion. One moment you may think, I am confident, and the next, I am worthless. These thoughts are not an accurate reflection of reality. They are simply mental patterns that come and go. Who observes the mind? If you are not your thoughts, then who is observing them? There is a part of you that can watch your thoughts without being caught up in them. This part of you is the witness, the silent awareness that is always present, regardless of what the mind is doing. When you meditate or practice mindfulness, you may notice this awareness more clearly. It is the space in which thoughts arise and dissolve, the stillness behind the mental chatter. This awareness is not bound by the contents of the mind. It is not influenced by thoughts, emotions, or beliefs. It simply is, unchanging, timeless, and ever-present. This awareness is what remains when the mind is quiet, when the thoughts have subsided. It is the essence of your being, and it is not separate from the awareness that exists in all beings. To realize that you are not your mind is to take a step closer to oneness. The mind, like the body, is a temporary phenomenon, a tool that helps you navigate the world, but not the core of who you are. When you disidentify from the mind, you begin to experience the freedom of pure awareness, unbound by the limitations of thought. Reflection. Spend a few moments observing your thoughts. Sit quietly and let them come and go, without trying to control them or follow them. Notice how each thought arises, lingers for a moment, and then fades away. Now ask yourself, who is observing these thoughts? Who is the I that is aware of the mind? Begin to sense the awareness behind the thoughts, the stillness that is always present. The self is an illusion. We have now seen that you are neither your body nor your mind. The body is a temporary form, constantly changing and deeply connected to the world around it. The mind is a stream of thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, also ever-changing and fleeting. Neither of these can be the true self, because neither is permanent. So, if you are not your body and not your mind, then what are you? The answer is both simple and profound. You are awareness. You are the consciousness that experiences the body and mind, but is not limited by them. You are the witness to the thoughts and sensations, but you are not confined to the stories the mind tells. This realization is the key to dissolving the illusion of the self. The self, the ego, is nothing more than a construct, a narrative built on the shifting sands of body and mind. It feels real because you have spent your life identifying with it, but when you look closely, it begins to unravel. What you thought was you is just a collection of labels, roles, and stories that the ego has used to maintain its sense of separateness. When you see through this illusion, you begin to understand the deeper truth. There is no separate self. The boundaries between self and other, between me and not me, are artificial. They exist only in the mind. In reality, everything is part of the same underlying essence, consciousness itself. The sense of individuality, the feeling of being separate from the world, is a mental illusion. The ego creates these boundaries to protect its identity, to maintain the illusion that it is in control. But in truth, you are not separate from anything. You are not a separate self navigating through a world of objects. You are the world. You are the consciousness in which everything arises. Imagine a wave on the surface of the ocean. The wave rises, moves, and eventually dissolves back into the ocean. For a time, it seems to be an individual, distinct from the water around it, but the wave was never separate from the ocean. It was always just a temporary expression of the ocean's movement. In the same way, you are not separate from the universe. You are a temporary expression of the infinite consciousness that flows through all things. This realization can feel like an unraveling, a dissolution of everything you've believed to be true. The mind may resist, the ego may push back, but if you continue to look closely, the illusion will start to crack. As the illusion of separateness begins to fade, what remains is oneness, the direct experience that you are not separate from anything, that you are the consciousness that pervades all of existence. This is not something that can be fully understood by the mind. It is not a concept to be grasped intellectually, but a truth to be directly experienced. When you truly see through the illusion of the self, you feel the dissolution of the ego, the boundaries that once defined you blur and melt away. What remains is a vast, boundless awareness that is free, whole, and complete. Reflection. Imagine your thoughts, emotions, and sensations as waves on the surface of the ocean. Each wave rises and falls, but beneath the waves, there is a deep, still ocean that is unaffected by the surface. Bring your awareness to this deeper part of yourself, the silent, unchanging awareness that lies beneath the ever-changing waves of your thoughts and feelings. Can you sense the stillness, the vastness of your true self beyond the mind? Chapter 3. The Ego's Game of Control. The ego is the mind's attempt to create a sense of stability and control in a world that is inherently fluid and impermanent. It thrives on distinction, on setting up barriers between self and other, and it clings to the belief that it can control the external world to ensure its own survival. The ego says, "I am this, and I am not that," constantly reinforcing its identity through comparison and judgment. But the ego is playing a game it can never win. The ego's deepest fear is its own dissolution. It fears the loss of control, the loss of identity, and ultimately, the loss of existence itself. This is why the ego is constantly grasping for more success, more possessions, more validation, believing that if it can just achieve enough, it will finally feel secure. But no matter how much the ego accumulates, it is never satisfied. Why? Because its sense of self is built on a foundation of illusion. The ego's survival depends on maintaining the illusion of separateness. It builds walls around itself, labeling certain things as me and everything else as not me. It identifies with the body, the mind, the roles it plays, and the possessions it accumulates. But all of these things are impermanent. The body ages, the mind changes, possessions are lost or taken away. The more the ego tries to cling to these things, the more fragile and threatened it feels. At the root of the ego's fear is the fear of death, not just physical death, but the death of identity. The ego is terrified of its own non-existence, and so it spends its life in a constant state of defense, trying to protect itself from anything that might threaten its sense of control. This is why the ego reacts so strongly to criticism, rejection, or failure. It sees these experiences not just as temporary setbacks, but as threats to its very survival. But the truth is that the ego never had any real control. The ego's sense of control is a facade, a desperate attempt to impose order on a universe that is inherently fluid and dynamic. Life is constantly changing, and no matter how hard the ego tries, it cannot stop the flow of existence. The more the ego tries to grasp and hold on, the more it suffers. The illusion of control. The ego believes it is in control of your life, but if you look closely, you'll see that this is an illusion. Think about how much of your life happens without your conscious input. Your body breathes, digests, and heals itself without you having to direct it. Your thoughts arise and disappear without your choosing them. Situations unfold in ways that you cannot predict or control. The world is not something you can manipulate to suit the ego's desires. It flows according to its own rhythm, its own intelligence. The ego tries to resist this flow because it wants to feel secure. It wants to believe that it can control the future and avoid anything that threatens its survival. But this resistance is the very thing that creates suffering. The more the ego fights against the natural flow of life, the more it feels anxious, afraid, and dissatisfied. To dissolve the ego, you must let go of the need for control. You must surrender to the reality that you are not in control, and that's okay. In fact, it's liberating. When you let go of control, you stop fighting against life and you begin to flow with it. This surrender is not a form of passivity or resignation. It is a deep recognition that life is far more intelligent than the ego can comprehend, and that there is a deeper force guiding everything. Ego death. The experience of ego death is the moment when the illusion of control and separateness finally collapses. It is the realization that the self you have been defending and protecting all your life does not actually exist. The I that you believe to be real is nothing more than a story, a construct of the mind. When this realization occurs, the ego dissolves, and with it, the boundaries between self and other fall away. This can be a terrifying experience for the ego because it feels like annihilation. But from the perspective of consciousness, it is the ultimate liberation. When the ego dies, what remains is pure awareness, free from the limitations of identity, free from the need to defend or protect. What remains is the direct experience of oneness, the recognition that you are not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. In the moment of ego death, there is no longer a sense of me and not me. There is only the vast, boundless awareness that has always been present, waiting to be recognized. This awareness is your true nature, and it is not confined to the body or the mind. It is the consciousness that permeates all of existence, the formless essence that gives rise to all forms. Ego death is not the end of the self, but the end of the false self. The true self, the awareness that you are, does not die. It has no beginning and no end. It is eternal, infinite, and beyond the limitations of time and space. Reflection. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to let go of the need for control? To release the ego's grasp on identity, possessions, and the fear of death? Spend a few moments in meditation, imagining what it would be like to dissolve into the flow of existence, free from the limitations of the ego. Allow yourself to feel the peace that comes with surrender, the freedom that comes from recognizing that you are not a separate self, but an expression of the infinite. Chapter 4. The Moment of Dissolution. As the illusion of the ego dissolves, there is a profound shift in perception, a moment of clarity in which the boundaries between self and other melt away. This is not a gradual process. It is a sudden and radical realization that everything you have believed about yourself is false. The you that has been struggling, striving, and suffering is nothing more than a construct, a mental habit that has no real substance. In the moment of dissolution, the mind becomes quiet. The constant chatter of thoughts and the endless stories about who you are and what you need to achieve fall silent. There is no longer a need to defend, to grasp, or to control. In this silence, you experience the truth of your being, the truth that has always been there, hidden beneath the noise of the ego. This truth is simple, yet profound. You are not separate from anything. The boundaries that once seemed so real, between self and other, between subject and object, disappear. What remains is the direct experience of oneness, the realization that you are not an individual moving through a world of separate things, but the consciousness that gives rise to all things. In this state of oneness, there is no sense of lack, no sense of incompleteness. You do not feel the need to seek validation or fulfillment because you are already whole. You do not feel the need to protect yourself because there is nothing to protect. The ego's fears of failure, rejection, death lose their power because they are based on the illusion of separateness. When you see through that illusion, the fears dissolve along with it, beyond time and space. In the moment of dissolution, you also realize that the ego's perception of time and space is an illusion. The ego experiences life as a series of events that unfold in linear time, past, present, and future. The ego clings to memories of the past and anxiously anticipates the future, believing that its survival depends on maintaining control over what has been and what will come. It constructs its identity based on these moments in time, defining itself through past experiences and future desires. But in the moment of ego dissolution, this linear perception of time collapses. You realize that the past and the future are nothing more than mental constructs, ideas that exist only in the mind. In the absence of the ego, there is no past and no future. There is only the eternal present moment, the now. This now is not a fleeting point between the past and the future, but an infinite, timeless space in which everything exists. It is the ground of all being, the source from which all experiences arise. When you are fully present in the now, you are not bound by time. You are not concerned with what has happened or what will happen, because you recognize that all of life is unfolding in this moment. The experience of oneness goes beyond the confines of time and space. In this state, you are no longer limited by the mind's concepts of here and there, now and then. You see that all things are happening simultaneously, that all points in time and space are connected. This is not an abstract idea, but a direct, lived experience. You are both the observer and the observed, the subject and the object. The boundaries between you and the world dissolve, and you experience the universe as a seamless, interconnected whole. This dissolution of time and space brings with it a profound sense of freedom. The fears and anxieties that arise from the ego's obsession with time, fear of the future, regret over the past, lose their grip. You are no longer striving for a future outcome or haunted by past mistakes. You are free to simply be, without the constant pressure to achieve, to become, or to fix what has already happened. In this timeless state, there is no longer a need to define yourself by what you have done or what you will do. You realize that your true nature is not something that can be measured or defined by time-bound achievements. It is something far deeper, far more expansive, something that exists beyond the story of your life. The self that you once believed in fades away, leaving only the pure presence of awareness. The end of seeking. One of the most liberating aspects of ego dissolution is the end of seeking. The ego is always seeking happiness, seeking fulfillment, seeking meaning. It believes that if it can just find the right experience, the right relationship, or the right achievement, it will finally feel complete. But no matter what the ego attains, it is never satisfied. There is always something more to strive for, something just out of reach. The realization of oneness brings an end to this endless seeking. When the ego dissolves, you no longer feel the need to search for something outside of yourself to make you whole. You realize that you are already whole. The fulfillment you were seeking was never in the external world. It was always within you, waiting to be discovered beneath the layers of the false self. This is not the same as complacency or passivity. It is not a resignation to mediocrity or a lack of ambition. Rather, it is a recognition that true fulfillment comes from within, not from chasing external goals. When you experience oneness, you no longer feel the need to chase after things in order to validate your existence. You are free to engage with the world from a place of peace, knowing that you are already complete. This sense of completeness allows you to experience life with a newfound sense of joy and freedom. You are no longer weighed down by the ego's demands and fears. You are free to live fully in the present moment, to experience life as it unfolds without the constant pressure to seek something more. The experience of boundlessness. In the moment of dissolution, there is a sense of boundlessness, a feeling that you are no longer confined to the body, the mind, or any particular location in space. The boundaries that once defined you dissolve, and you experience yourself as part of the infinite. This boundlessness is not a loss of self, but a realization that the true self is far greater than the limited identity you once believed in. This experience of boundlessness can feel like an expansion, as if the walls that once enclosed you have fallen away, revealing an infinite space that you are part of. You no longer feel the need to protect or defend yourself because there is nothing to defend. You are not a separate, vulnerable individual in a hostile world. You are the world. You are the consciousness that pervades all things. This sense of boundlessness is often accompanied by a feeling of love, a love that is not directed toward any particular person or thing, but a love that encompasses all of existence. In the state of oneness, you recognize that there is no separation between you and others, and this recognition naturally gives rise to a feeling of unconditional love and compassion. You see yourself in others, and others in yourself. The barriers that once created division and conflict fall away, and what remains is a deep sense of unity and connection. This love is not an emotion in the way that the ego understands it. It is not based on conditions or circumstances. It is not something that comes and goes. It is the natural expression of oneness, the realization that you and all beings are interconnected, that you are all expressions of the same consciousness. Reflection. Close your eyes and imagine that the boundaries of your body have dissolved. Imagine that you are no longer confined to a specific location in space. Feel yourself expanding, merging with the air around you, with the earth beneath you, with the sky above you. Allow yourself to experience the boundlessness of your true nature. In this space, sense the love that flows through all things, the love that is the essence of your being. Chapter 5. The Awakening to Oneness. Awakening to oneness is not an event that happens once and is then over. It is not a peak experience that you can capture, hold on to, and revisit at will. Instead, it is a shift in perception, a transformation of how you see and experience reality. Once the illusion of separateness has been shattered, you can no longer view the world in the same way. The experience of oneness fundamentally changes the way you relate to yourself, to others, and to the world. This shift is often described as a remembering, a return to a truth that you have always known but had forgotten. Oneness is not something you need to attain or achieve. It is not something that exists outside of you or beyond your reach. It is the most fundamental truth of existence, the underlying reality that has always been present. The journey of awakening is not about becoming something new, but about recognizing what has always been. The collapse of boundaries. One of the most profound aspects of the awakening to oneness is the collapse of boundaries. The boundaries that once seemed so solid, between self and other, between subject and object, dissolve. You realize that the separation you once perceived was never real. It was a product of the mind, a mental construct that the ego used to define and protect itself. When these boundaries fall away, you experience a sense of unity with all things. You no longer feel like a separate individual navigating through a world of objects. Instead, you feel like a part of the whole, an expression of the same consciousness that animates everything. This realization brings with it a deep sense of peace and contentment, as the constant struggle to protect and defend the ego is no longer necessary. The emptiness and the fullness. As the ego dissolves, you may initially experience a sense of emptiness. This is the emptiness of the self, the realization that the individual I you once believed in does not exist. But this emptiness is not a void or a lack. It is a spaciousness, a freedom from the constraints of identity and separation. And within this emptiness, you discover a profound fullness. The fullness comes from the realization that you are not a separate entity, but an expression of the infinite. This fullness is not something you can grasp or possess. It is the natural state of being when the mind and the ego are quiet, when you are fully present in the now. Reflection. Sit quietly and reflect on the nature of emptiness and fullness. What does it mean to feel empty of the self, but full of the universe? Can you sense the spaciousness that arises when you let go of the need to define yourself? Allow yourself to rest in this space, without seeking to fill it with thoughts or images. Chapter 5. The Awakening to Oneness, continued. As the emptiness of the ego dissolves into the fullness of being, something remarkable begins to unfold. You realize that the fullness you now experience is not something external. It is not a feeling that comes from outside of you. It is not given to you by anyone or anything. It is the natural expression of your true self, which has always been present beneath the layers of the ego. The fullness is not a material fullness. It is not the kind of satisfaction that comes from acquiring possessions or achieving goals. It is not the result of fulfilling desires or reaching a state of external success. Instead, it is an inner fullness, a deep, abiding sense of peace, contentment, and wholeness that arises when the illusion of separateness falls away. This is the fullness of oneness. You come to understand that this fullness is your natural state, the state you have always been in but have forgotten. The ego's constant striving, its endless search for more, is rooted in the belief that something is missing, that you are incomplete. But when the ego dissolves, you see that there was never anything missing. You were never incomplete. You are, and always have been, an expression of the infinite self. In this realization, the concept of the self as you once knew it loses its meaning. The individual self, the I you once believed in, was never more than a temporary role, a mask worn by the infinite. The true self, the self that is beyond the ego, is not limited by the boundaries of the body, the mind, or personal identity. It is not confined to a particular name, story, or history. It is the infinite self, the consciousness that pervades all things, the awareness in which the entire universe unfolds. This infinite self is not something separate from you. It is not a distant, abstract concept. It is the essence of who you are. When you awaken to oneness, you recognize that this infinite self is the same self that exists in all beings, in all forms of life. The boundaries that once separated you from others dissolve, and you experience yourself as part of the vast web of existence. But this realization goes even deeper. As the boundaries between self and other collapse, so too does the boundary between inner and outer. You begin to see that the inner world of thoughts, feelings, and sensations is not separate from the outer world of objects, events, and experiences. The distinction between the two was created by the mind, but in truth, they are both expressions of the same underlying reality. When you experience this directly, you realize that the world you see outside of you is not separate from the consciousness that experiences it. In fact, the world and your awareness of it are one and the same. You are not just in the world. You are the world, and the world is you. There is no separation between the observer and the observed, no division between subject and object. Everything is part of the same flow of consciousness, arising and dissolving within the infinite self. Reflection. Take a moment to reflect on the idea that the world you perceive is not separate from the awareness that perceives it. As you look around, ask yourself, is there a true boundary between me and the world, or is the world an extension of my own consciousness? Allow yourself to soften the distinction between inner and outer, recognizing that both are aspects of the same unified reality. Chapter 6. The Collapse of Duality. The experience of oneness is the collapse of duality. Duality is the belief that the world is divided into opposites, self and other, light and dark, good and bad, life and death. It is the foundation of the ego's understanding of reality, the lens through which the mind interprets the world. The ego thrives on duality because it needs division to define itself. It defines who it is by what it is not. I am this and not that. But duality is an illusion, created by the mind to give the ego a sense of control and understanding. When the ego dissolves, so too does the illusion of duality. You begin to see that the opposites you once believed in are not truly separate. They are two sides of the same coin, different expressions of the same underlying reality, light and dark. One of the most fundamental dualities is the division between light and dark, good and bad. The ego judges the world in terms of these opposites, seeking to align itself with the good and avoid the bad. It strives for light and rejects darkness, believing that one is preferable to the other. But in the experience of oneness, this duality falls away. You come to understand that light and dark are not in opposition to one another. They are both necessary aspects of the whole. Just as day and night are part of the same cycle, light and dark exist in a natural balance. One cannot exist without the other. They are complementary, not contradictory. When you see through the illusion of duality, you realize that both light and dark are expressions of the same source. There is no need to judge or reject one in favor of the other. They are both part of the same dance of existence. Life and death. The collapse of duality also brings with it a profound shift in your understanding of life and death. The ego fears death because it sees death as the end of its existence. It believes that life and death are opposites, that one must inevitably lead to the other. But when the ego dissolves, you see that life and death are not separate. They are part of the same continuous cycle. Life is not something that begins at birth and ends at death. It is a flow, an expression of the infinite self that takes on different forms. Death is not the end of life, but a transformation, a return to the source from which all forms arise. When you awaken to oneness, you no longer fear death, because you recognize that what you truly are, the infinite self, cannot die. It has no beginning and no end. It is eternal, beyond the limitations of time and space. This realization brings a deep sense of peace. The fear of death that once drove the ego's actions fades away, and you experience a profound acceptance of the natural cycle of life. You see that just as the seasons change, just as day turns to night, life flows into death and death into life. There is no separation between the two. They are simply different expressions of the same unbroken continuity, the unity of all things. As duality collapses, you begin to experience the unity that underlies all things. You see that the distinctions the mind once made between self and other, inner and outer, life and death, are all part of the same whole. This unity is not a theoretical concept or a philosophical idea. It is a direct experience, a felt sense of connection to everything that exists. In this state of unity, there is no longer a need for division, for judgment, or for separation. You no longer feel the need to categorize or label the world in terms of opposites. Instead, you experience the world as a seamless, interconnected web of existence, where every part reflects the whole. This is the essence of oneness, the realization that everything is part of the same source, the same consciousness. The world you perceive is not separate from you, but an expression of the same self that you are. You are the observer and the observed, the creator and the creation, the wave and the ocean. Reflection. Spend time contemplating the dualities in your life. Where do you draw lines between opposites, between what you consider good and bad, light and dark, life and death? Ask yourself, are these distinctions real, or are they constructs of the mind? Can you begin to see the unity that exists beneath these apparent opposites? Allow yourself to soften the boundaries between dualities and experience the underlying oneness that connects them. Chapter 7. The Infinite and the Finite. As you deepen into the experience of oneness, another profound realization emerges. The recognition that the infinite and the finite are not separate, but intimately connected. The ego believes in a clear distinction between the infinite, what is boundless, eternal, and unchanging, and the finite, the world of form, time, and limitation. But in truth, the finite is simply the way the infinite expresses itself in the world. The infinite self, the consciousness that you are, is beyond form. It is boundless, timeless, and formless. It is the source from which all things arise. But this infinite self does not stand apart from the finite world. It does not exist in some distant transcendent realm, separate from the world of everyday experience. Rather, it manifests as the finite world. Every form you see, every object, every living being is an expression of the infinite taking on a temporary, finite form. The tree outside your window, the clouds in the sky, the person sitting next to you, all are expressions of the infinite self, temporarily appearing in finite form. This realization transforms your relationship to the world of form. You no longer see the finite as something separate from the infinite, but as its natural expression. The play of form. The finite world, with all its forms and distinctions, is often described as a play or a dance of the infinite. In the same way that a wave rises and falls in the ocean, every form in the world arises from the infinite and eventually dissolves back into it. The wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean in motion, temporarily expressing itself in a distinct form. In the same way, the forms we see in the world, including our own bodies and minds, are temporary expressions of the infinite consciousness. They arise, take shape, and eventually dissolve, but at no point are they separate from the source that gave rise to them. This understanding transforms how you experience the world of form. Instead of seeing yourself and others as isolated individuals, you begin to see that every form is part of the same flow of existence. The tree, the clouds, the people around you, and even your own body are all waves rising and falling in the infinite ocean of consciousness. There is no true separation between the forms, just as there is no separation between individual waves on the ocean. This realization can bring a profound sense of freedom. Once you see that form is temporary, you no longer need to cling to it or fear its dissolution. The body will age, relationships will change, and the external world will continue to shift and evolve. But none of this touches the infinite consciousness that is your true nature. You recognize that the rise and fall of form is part of the natural rhythm of existence. There is no need to resist it, control it, or hold on to it. The paradox of the infinite in the finite. At first, the idea that the infinite expresses itself through the finite may seem paradoxical. How can something that is boundless, formless, and eternal be expressed through something as limited as a human body, a tree, or a star? The ego's perception of reality is based on duality, so it assumes that the infinite and the finite must be separate, one above, the other below, one eternal, the other temporary. But in the experience of oneness, this paradox resolves itself. You see that the infinite is not something outside of the finite, but something that is intimately interwoven with it. The finite world is a manifestation of the infinite. Every form is like a drop of water that contains the entire ocean within it. The infinite does not lose its boundless nature when it expresses itself through finite forms. It simply becomes those forms for a time. This realization changes how you relate to your own existence. You no longer see yourself as a limited being confined to a finite body and mind. Instead, you recognize that you are the infinite consciousness temporarily expressing itself through the form of your body and mind. This form will eventually dissolve, just as a wave eventually sinks back into the ocean, but the consciousness that you are will not disappear. It will simply return to its formless state, ready to express itself in new forms. This understanding also brings a sense of reverence for the finite world. While the ego sees the finite as limited and insignificant compared to the vastness of the infinite, the experience of oneness reveals that the finite is not less than the infinite. It is an integral part of it. Every moment of existence, every form that arises, is a sacred expression of the infinite. to witness the beauty of a sunset, to feel the warmth of a loved one's embrace, to hear the sound of a bird singing. These are not trivial experiences. They are moments in which the infinite reveals itself through the finite. Reflection. As you go through your day, take time to notice the forms around you. Look at the trees, the sky, the people you encounter, and even your own body. Recognize that these forms are not separate from the infinite consciousness. They are temporary expressions of the same boundless awareness that you are. Allow yourself to see the sacredness in every form, knowing that it is an expression of the infinite. Chapter 8. The Experience of Boundlessness. As the boundaries between the finite and the infinite dissolve, you begin to experience what can only be described as boundlessness. This is not an abstract idea or a distant goal. It is a direct, lived experience that emerges as the ego's grip on identity loosens. Boundlessness is the realization that you are not confined to the body, the mind, or any particular point in space or time. You are the awareness in which all of these things arise, and this awareness has no limits. In moments of deep meditation, or in times when the mind becomes quiet, you may have glimpses of this boundlessness. You may feel that your sense of self expands beyond the confines of your body, that you are not located in a particular place, but are everywhere. You may feel as though you are merging with the world around you, with the sky, the earth, the stars, and the air. This is not the dissolution of the self, but the dissolution of the false self, the ego that believed it was separate and small. The expansion of consciousness. The experience of boundlessness is often described as an expansion of consciousness. In everyday life, the ego narrows your awareness, focusing your attention on the things that reinforce its sense of identity, your thoughts, your possessions, your achievements, and your relationships. The ego creates a sense of being a small self, separate from the vastness of the world around it. But when the ego dissolves, your awareness expands. You begin to see yourself not as a small, isolated being, but as part of something far greater. This expansion is not something that you can force or achieve through effort. It happens naturally as the layers of illusion fall away. You begin to sense the infinite consciousness that underlies all things, and you realize that this consciousness is your true nature. As your awareness expands, the distinctions between inside and outside begin to blur. You no longer feel as though you are a separate self looking out at the world from behind your eyes. Instead, you feel as though you are part of the world, that the world is part of you. The space around you feels like an extension of your own awareness, and you begin to experience the interconnectedness of all things. This expansion of consciousness is often accompanied by a feeling of deep peace. The struggles and anxieties of the ego fade into the background, replaced by a sense of harmony and stillness. You no longer feel the need to defend or protect yourself because you realize that there is nothing to defend. The self you once believed in, the small self with its fears and desires, was never real. What remains is the awareness that has always been present, watching the ebb and flow of thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The boundlessness of love. One of the most beautiful aspects of the experience of boundlessness is the boundlessness of love that emerges. When the ego dissolves, the barriers between yourself and others fall away. You no longer see other people as separate individuals, but as expressions of the same consciousness that you are. This recognition naturally gives rise to a feeling of unconditional love. This love is not the kind of love the ego is familiar with. It is not based on attachment, desire, or need. It is not something that comes and goes depending on how others treat you or what you want from them. Instead, it is a love that flows naturally from the experience of oneness. When you recognize that all beings are part of the same consciousness, you cannot help but feel love and compassion for them. Their joy is your joy, and their suffering is your suffering. This boundless love is not limited to human beings. It extends to all forms of life, animals, plants, the earth, the sky, and even inanimate objects. You begin to see that everything is an expression of the same consciousness, and this recognition fills you with a sense of reverence and love for all of existence. Reflection. Take a few moments to sit quietly and bring your awareness to the space around you. As you breathe, feel the air entering and leaving your body, and notice how your breath connects you to the world around you. Now, expand your awareness beyond your body. Imagine that your consciousness is not confined to your physical form, but extends out into the space around you, merging with the earth, the sky, and the stars. Allow yourself to feel the boundlessness of your true nature, and notice the love that arises naturally from this experience. Chapter 9. Dissolving into the Source. As the experience of oneness deepens, you may begin to feel a sense of dissolution, a dissolving of the self into the source from which all things arise. This is the final stage of ego dissolution, the moment when the individual self merges completely with the infinite. In this state, there is no longer any sense of being a separate self, no sense of I or me. There is only the source, the infinite consciousness that gives rise to all things. This dissolution is not a loss of self, but a return to your true nature. It is a recognition that the individual self you once believed in was never real. It was always an expression of the infinite, temporarily taking on form. When this form dissolves, what remains is the infinite consciousness that has always been present. The experience of dissolving into the source can feel like a homecoming. It is a return to the place from which you came, a merging with the essence of all existence. There is no fear, no resistance, only a deep sense of peace and acceptance. You recognize that you were never separate from the source, that you have always been an expression of it, and that your journey was simply a process of remembering this truth. In this state, there is no longer any distinction between the finite and the infinite, between form and formlessness. Everything is part of the same flow of consciousness, arising and dissolving in the source. You are the source, and the source is you. This recognition transcends any intellectual understanding. It is a felt experience, a profound shift in being where all distinctions and separations collapse. What you once thought of as you dissolves like a drop of water merging back into the ocean. There is no longer an individual self standing apart from the world, no longer any sense of otherness or division. Everything that arises, thoughts, sensations, objects, and people, are seen as expressions of the same infinite consciousness. In this state of dissolution, the usual concerns of the ego, ambition, fear, desire, and judgment lose all meaning. You no longer feel the need to defend or assert yourself because there is no separate self to protect. The boundaries between what is mine and what is not mine vanish. There is only the oneness of existence, the seamless flow of consciousness that permeates all things. The eternal now. One of the most striking aspects of dissolving into the source is the collapse of time. The ego experiences time as a linear progression, where the past leads to the present, and the present leads to the future. It is constantly moving from one moment to the next, always anticipating what is to come, or clinging to what has been. But when the ego dissolves, so too does the illusion of linear time. You realize that the only true moment is the eternal now. This now is not a fleeting point between the past and the future. It is the infinite ground of being from which all experiences arise. The past and future are seen for what they are, mental constructs created by the mind to give the illusion of continuity. In reality, everything is happening in this present moment, and this moment is timeless. This realization brings an incredible sense of freedom. The ego is constantly seeking something in the future, a goal, a success, a relationship that will finally bring fulfillment. But in the state of oneness, you see that fulfillment is not something that will happen in the future. It is something that is already present in the now. There is no need to seek, no need to strive. Everything you have ever sought is already here in this eternal moment of presence. The end of seeking. As you dissolve into the source, the end of seeking naturally arises. The ego is always on a quest, always looking for something outside of itself to bring completion. It believes that happiness, peace, and fulfillment lie somewhere in the future, always just beyond reach. But when the self dissolves into oneness, the entire premise of seeking falls apart. You realize that there is nothing to seek because you are already whole. The peace, love, and fulfillment you were searching for in external things were never out there. They were always within you, waiting to be recognized. In the state of oneness, you see that the self you once believed needed to be fulfilled was an illusion. The infinite consciousness that you are does not need to seek anything because it is already complete. This is not a passive state of resignation. Rather, it is an active realization that the very act of seeking was keeping you from seeing the truth. The ego was creating a future-oriented narrative that prevented you from fully experiencing the present moment. But when the ego dissolves, the veil lifts, and you see that the treasure you were seeking was always with you. The mystery of existence. As you dissolve into the source, you may also experience a profound sense of awe and wonder at the mystery of existence. This is not a mystery that can be solved or understood by the mind. It is the mystery of being itself, the unfathomable truth that anything exists at all. In the state of oneness, you no longer try to explain or rationalize this mystery. You simply stand in awe of it, feeling the deep sense of reverence that arises from being in direct contact with the ground of existence. This mystery is not something separate from you. You are an expression of it, a manifestation of the infinite consciousness that gives rise to all things. The forms you see around you, the trees, the sky, the people, and even your own body, are all part of this mystery, arising from the same source. And when the self dissolves, you experience this mystery not as something distant or abstract, but as the very essence of who you are. Reflection. Sit in stillness and allow yourself to feel the presence of this moment. Let go of any thoughts of the past or future and bring your attention fully to the now. As you breathe, feel yourself dissolving into the space around you, merging with the infinite consciousness that holds all things. In this moment, ask yourself, what is it that experiences this presence? Who am I when there is no thought of I? Allow yourself to rest in the mystery of being without seeking an answer. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Truth. When the layers of ego are stripped away and the self dissolves into the source, what remains is the unveiling of truth. This truth is not a concept or a belief. It is the direct experience of reality as it is. In this state, you see clearly that all the stories you have told yourself about who you are, what the world is, and what life is about were never the whole truth. They were narratives created by the mind, constructs designed to make sense of the world from the limited perspective of the ego. But as the illusion of separateness fades, you are able to see reality without the distortions of the mind. You see the truth that you are not separate from the universe, but are an expression of it. You see the truth that the self you once believed in was never real. It was a temporary role, a mask worn by the infinite for a time. And you see the truth that the love, peace, and fulfillment you have been seeking are not things to be attained. They are the essence of your being. This unveiling of truth is often accompanied by a profound sense of clarity. The fog of confusion that the ego created, the constant mental chatter, the endless judgments and comparisons, lifts, and you are able to see the world with fresh eyes. Everything appears as it truly is, a perfect expression of the infinite consciousness. The judgments of good and bad, right and wrong, fall away, and you experience reality as it is, whole, complete, and free. The collapse of personal identity. One of the most significant aspects of the unveiling of truth is the collapse of personal identity. The ego constructs a sense of self based on personal identity. Your name, your story, your achievements, your failures. It creates a narrative that defines who you are in relation to the world. But when the ego dissolves, this personal identity falls away. You realize that you are not the story you have been telling yourself. You are not the sum of your experiences, your relationships, or your roles. These are all aspects of the finite world, temporary forms that arise and dissolve. The true self is not bound by any of these things. It is the infinite self, the formless awareness that gives rise to all forms, but is not confined by them. This collapse of personal identity can be a disorienting experience for the ego, but it is also incredibly liberating. You no longer feel the need to cling to a particular identity or role. You are free to flow with life, to experience the world as it unfolds, without the constant need to reinforce a sense of self. In this state, there is no longer any attachment to success or failure, praise or criticism. You simply are, an expression of the infinite, free from the limitations of personal identity. The eternal witness. As personal identity collapses, you begin to experience yourself as the eternal witness. This is the awareness that watches the unfolding of life without attachment or judgment. It is the part of you that has always been present, observing the rise and fall of thoughts, emotions, and experiences, but never getting caught up in them. This witness is not a passive observer. It is the essence of your being, the consciousness that gives rise to all things. When you recognize yourself as the eternal witness, you no longer feel the need to control or manipulate life. You no longer feel the need to protect or defend a personal identity. Instead, you allow life to unfold naturally, knowing that you are part of the same flow of existence. The witness is not separate from life. It is life itself, expressing itself through every form and experience. This realization brings a deep sense of peace. You are no longer identified with the drama of the mind, the constant push and pull of desires and fears. You see that life is a flow, a dance of consciousness, and you are both the dancer and the dance. The eternal witness watches this dance with joy and reverence, knowing that it is all an expression of the infinite. Reflection. Spend time sitting quietly, allowing yourself to witness the flow of thoughts and emotions without becoming attached to them. As each thought arises, ask yourself, who is observing this thought? Can you sense the presence of the eternal witness, the awareness that is always watching but never caught up in the drama of the mind? Allow yourself to rest in this awareness, knowing that it is your true nature. Chapter 11. Returning to the illusion. After experiencing the dissolution of the self and the unveiling of truth, you may find yourself returning to the world of form and illusion. This is not a regression or a failure. It is a natural part of the process. Even after the deepest experiences of oneness, the mind and the ego may reassert themselves, pulling you back into the world of duality. But something has fundamentally changed. While the mind and ego may reassert themselves, and you may once again experience the familiar pull of duality, you now carry with you the deep knowledge of oneness. The experience of the dissolution of the self, of merging with the infinite, is not something that can be undone. It leaves an indelible imprint on your consciousness. Though the ego might try to return to its old patterns, seeking, grasping, fearing, you now see these patterns for what they truly are: illusions. The world of form, with all its complexities, joys, and challenges, re-emerges. But now, your relationship with it is fundamentally transformed. You know that this world, this life, is not separate from the source. It is an expression of it. And while you move through the world, engage with others, and face life's ups and downs, the deeper truth of oneness remains with you. It is the ground of your being, the silent awareness that is always present beneath the surface of experience. The reappearance of the ego. It is important to understand that the ego does not disappear permanently after an experience of ego death. The ego is part of the human experience. It is a tool that helps you navigate the world of form. The ego will continue to try to reassert its dominance, to rebuild its sense of identity, to cling to its old stories and fears. This is a natural part of being human. However, after experiencing oneness, you no longer identify with the ego in the same way. Instead of being controlled by the ego's desires and fears, you now have the ability to witness them with clarity. You can see the ego's attempts to create separation and division, its endless seeking for validation and security. But you no longer believe in its stories. You recognize that the ego is a construct, a useful tool for functioning in the world, but not the truth of who you are. When the ego reappears, you meet it with compassion and understanding. You see that it is not something to be fought or suppressed, but something to be integrated. The ego can be a helpful guide in navigating practical matters, but it is no longer the master of your inner life. You no longer allow the ego to dictate your sense of self-worth or your perception of reality. Instead, you rest in the awareness that you are the infinite consciousness behind the ego, watching its movements without getting caught in its traps. The dance of form and formlessness. As you return to the world of form, you begin to see life as a dance between form and formlessness. The finite and the infinite, the temporary and the eternal, are not in conflict. They are two aspects of the same reality. The forms you encounter in life, the people, the objects, the experiences, are expressions of the infinite, temporarily taking on shape before dissolving back into the formless source. This understanding allows you to move through life with a sense of ease and freedom. You no longer cling to form, knowing that all forms are temporary. You no longer fear loss or change, because you see that behind every form is the unchanging formlessness of consciousness. You are able to engage fully with life, to enjoy its beauty, its relationships, and its challenges, without being attached to any particular outcome. This dance of form and formlessness is reflected in everything you do. When you are immersed in the world of form, working, creating, loving, you are fully present, knowing that these experiences are expressions of the infinite. And when you return to stillness, to meditation or reflection, you reconnect with the formless source, the awareness that underlies all things. The movement between these two states, form and formlessness, action and stillness, becomes a natural rhythm, like the ebb and flow of the tides. The return to ordinary life. After the profound experience of ego death and the awakening to oneness, you may return to what appears to be ordinary life. You still have responsibilities, relationships, and the tasks of daily living. But now, these ordinary experiences are infused with a sense of sacredness. You see that even the most mundane aspects of life, washing the dishes, walking down the street, having a conversation, are expressions of the infinite consciousness. Every moment becomes an opportunity to recognize the oneness that pervades all things. Every interaction, every experience, is seen as part of the same flow of existence. There is no separation between the sacred and the mundane, the spiritual and the practical. Life itself is the expression of the divine, and each moment is an opportunity to experience this truth. In this way, your return to ordinary life is not a return to the illusion of separateness, but a deeper embodiment of oneness. You live in the world of form, but you are no longer bound by it. You engage with the world fully, but you do so from a place of inner freedom, knowing that the true essence of life is beyond form. Reflection. As you go through your daily life, take a moment to pause and recognize the sacredness of the present moment. Whether you are engaged in a simple task or a meaningful conversation, allow yourself to feel the presence of the infinite in that moment. Notice how the boundaries between the mundane and the divine dissolve when you bring full awareness to the now. Chapter 12. The Cycle of Awakening. The journey of awakening is not a linear path with a clear beginning and end. It is a cycle, a continuous process of deepening into the experience of oneness and returning to the world of form. There may be moments of profound clarity where the truth of oneness is undeniable, followed by periods where the ego reasserts itself and the illusion of separation returns. This ebb and flow is part of the natural rhythm of awakening. The spiral of consciousness. Rather than thinking of awakening as a straight line, it is more helpful to think of it as a spiral. With each cycle, you return to familiar experiences and challenges, but with a deeper understanding and a greater sense of clarity. You may find yourself facing the same fears, the same patterns of thought, but now you have the tools to see through them. Each time you spiral back to these challenges, you do so with a greater awareness of the truth of oneness. This spiral of consciousness allows you to deepen your experience of oneness over time. The initial awakening may feel like a sudden, transformative experience, but the process of integrating this awakening into your life is ongoing. With each cycle, you learn to embody the truth of oneness more fully, to live from a place of awareness even in the face of challenges. The role of surrender. At the heart of the awakening process is the practice of surrender. Surrender does not mean giving up or resigning yourself to fate. It means letting go of the ego's need for control. It means trusting in the flow of life, knowing that the infinite consciousness that you are is guiding everything. Surrender is the recognition that you do not need to struggle or strive to achieve awakening. It is already within you, waiting to be realized. Surrender also means accepting the natural cycles of expansion and contraction that are part of the awakening process. There will be moments of expansion where you feel deeply connected to the infinite, followed by moments of contraction where the ego tries to reassert its control. Both are part of the journey. The key is to meet both with acceptance, knowing that every experience is an opportunity to deepen your understanding of oneness. Reflection. In moments of struggle or resistance, ask yourself, what would it feel like to surrender to the flow of life? Can you let go of the ego's need for control and trust in the wisdom of the infinite consciousness? Allow yourself to relax into the present moment, knowing that everything is unfolding as it should. Chapter 13. The Eternal Return. As you move through the cycles of awakening, you begin to realize that there is no final destination. The experience of oneness is not something you achieve and then hold on to forever. It is a continuous unfolding, a dance between form and formlessness, between individuality and oneness, between time and timelessness. The journey itself is the destination. There is no need to seek a final moment of enlightenment or a permanent state of oneness. The process of awakening is eternal, just as consciousness itself is eternal. You return again and again to the truth of oneness, each time with a deeper understanding, each time more fully embodying the infinite consciousness that you are. The infinite cycle. This cycle is reflected in the natural world. The seasons change, the tides ebb and flow, the sun rises and sets, and yet the essence of life remains the same. In the same way, your journey of awakening is an infinite cycle of remembering and forgetting, of dissolving into oneness and returning to the world of form. There is no end to this cycle, just as there is no end to the infinite consciousness that you are. And yet, within this cycle, there is a profound sense of peace. You no longer feel the need to rush toward a final goal or a fixed state of being. You understand that you are always exactly where you need to be, that the infinite is always expressing itself through you in each moment. The journey is the expression of the divine, and you are both the traveler and the destination. The eternal return to oneness. As you deepen into this realization, you experience the eternal return to oneness. You come to see that every moment, every breath, every thought is a return to the source. The experience of separation is part of the dance, but it is never the final reality. Each moment, whether you are fully aware of it or not, is a return to the source, a return to oneness. Even in the midst of confusion, suffering, or the ego's reassertion, there is always an underlying current of oneness. It is the invisible thread that connects all experiences, guiding you back to the truth of your being. This eternal return is not something that you must strive for. It is the natural rhythm of existence. Just as the breath rises and falls, just as the waves ebb and flow, you return again and again to the realization of oneness. Each time you come back to this truth, it deepens within you, becoming less of an intellectual understanding and more of a lived, embodied experience. Over time, the moments of oneness become more frequent, more natural, until you begin to live from this place of unity without effort. The end of striving. One of the greatest gifts of the eternal return is the end of striving. The ego is always striving to achieve, to control, to secure its place in the world. It believes that if it can just reach a certain goal, or if it can just accumulate enough, it will finally find peace. But the truth of oneness reveals that there is nothing to strive for, because you are already what you seek. In the experience of the eternal return, you realize that you are always home, always at the source. There is nothing outside of yourself that needs to be attained, no external condition that will complete you. The striving falls away, because you see that you are already whole. The peace you seek is already within you, waiting to be recognized. This does not mean that life becomes static, or that you stop engaging with the world. On the contrary, when you stop striving, you become more fully alive, more open to the flow of existence. You engage with life from a place of inner stillness, knowing that you are not incomplete, but a perfect expression of the infinite. Your actions are no longer driven by fear or desire, but by the natural rhythm of the universe moving through you. The cycles of forgetting and remembering. Even as you deepen into oneness, the cycles of forgetting and remembering will continue. There will be times when the ego pulls you back into the illusion of separation, when old patterns of fear, desire, and attachment resurface. This is part of the human experience, and it is not something to resist or judge. Instead, you can meet these moments with compassion, knowing that they are part of the greater cycle of awakening. Each time you forget the truth of oneness, you are given an opportunity to remember, and each time you remember, your understanding deepens. This is the eternal dance between the finite and the infinite, between form and formlessness, between self and oneness. It is the process by which the universe comes to know itself through you. In this dance, forgetting is not a failure. It is a necessary part of the journey. Without forgetting, there could be no remembering. Without the experience of separation, there could be no return to unity. This is the paradox of existence. The very illusion of separateness creates the conditions for the realization of oneness. The cycles of forgetting and remembering are the universe's way of experiencing itself, of playing the divine game of creation. Reflection. In moments when you feel disconnected, confused, or caught in the grip of the ego, remind yourself of the cycle of forgetting and remembering. Know that this moment of separation is not permanent, but part of the dance. Take a few deep breaths and feel the presence of oneness beneath the surface of your experience. Allow yourself to trust in the eternal return, knowing that you will always be guided back to the truth of who you are. Chapter 14. The Play of Consciousness. At the heart of this cycle of forgetting and remembering, of separation and return, is the play of consciousness. This play, often referred to in spiritual traditions as the Lila, Sanskrit for divine play, is the creative expression of the infinite consciousness. The universe is not a static entity. It is a dynamic, ever-changing dance of forms, experiences, and expressions. And you, as a conscious being, are part of this divine play. The realization of oneness does not mean that the play of life comes to an end. On the contrary, it means that you begin to engage with life in a new way, without attachment, without fear, and with a deep sense of joy and freedom. You see that the world of form, with all its beauty and complexity, is not separate from the formless source. It is the source expressing itself in an infinite variety of ways. The illusion of control. One of the key insights that arises from this understanding is the realization that the ego's belief in control is an illusion. The ego believes that it must control its environment, its relationships, and its future in order to secure its survival. But in the play of consciousness, control is unnecessary. Life flows according to its own rhythm, guided by an intelligence far greater than the ego can comprehend. When you awaken to oneness, you begin to trust in this flow. You no longer feel the need to control every outcome or force things to go your way. Instead, you allow life to unfold naturally, knowing that everything is part of the greater dance. This does not mean that you become passive or disengaged from life. It means that your actions are no longer driven by fear or the need for control. You act from a place of inner stillness, responding to the moment with clarity and openness. This trust in the flow of life brings a profound sense of peace. The ego's constant striving and grasping falls away, and you are able to move through life with ease, knowing that you are supported by the same consciousness that moves the stars, the seasons, and the tides. You become a willing participant in the divine play, engaging fully with life while remaining rooted in the awareness of oneness. Joy in the dance. One of the most beautiful aspects of the play of consciousness is the joy that arises from it. When you recognize that life is a dance of forms, a creative expression of the infinite, you begin to experience a deep sense of joy and wonder. Every moment, every experience becomes an opportunity to witness the unfolding of the divine. Even in the midst of challenges or difficulties, you can find joy in the recognition that all of it is part of the greater dance. This joy is not dependent on external circumstances. It is not the fleeting happiness that comes from achieving a goal or acquiring something new. It is a deep, abiding joy that comes from being fully present in the moment, from recognizing the sacredness of life in all its forms. This joy is the natural expression of the infinite consciousness that you are. It is the realization that life, in all its complexity, is a celebration of existence. Reflection. As you move through your day, take a moment to notice the play of consciousness in your surroundings. Watch the movement of the wind in the trees, the flow of water in a stream, the interaction of people around you. See these movements as part of the greater dance of life, expressions of the infinite consciousness. Allow yourself to feel the joy that arises from this recognition, knowing that you are both a participant and a witness in this divine play. Chapter 15. The Sacredness of Ordinary Life. As the realization of oneness deepens, you begin to see that ordinary life, the tasks, relationships, and experiences of daily living, are not separate from the sacred. The sacred and the ordinary are one and the same. The divine is not found only in moments of stillness or profound insight. It is found in the everyday moments of life, in the simple, mundane tasks that the ego often overlooks. Finding the divine in the mundane, washing the dishes, walking the dog, having a conversation with a friend. These moments are often seen as ordinary, even trivial. But when you are fully present in these moments, when you bring your awareness to the now, you begin to see the sacredness that underlies them. Every moment, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, is an opportunity to experience the divine. This is not about transforming ordinary tasks into something extraordinary. It is about recognizing that everything, from the most mundane to the most profound, is an expression of the same consciousness. The divine is not something that exists apart from the world. It is the world itself, manifesting in countless forms and experiences. When you bring your full awareness to the present moment, you see that every action, every interaction is part of the sacred flow of life, the practice of presence. The key to experiencing the sacredness of ordinary life is the practice of presence. Presence is the state of being fully aware of the now, without getting caught up in thoughts of the past or future. It is the act of bringing your full attention to whatever you are doing, whether it is something as simple as folding laundry or as meaningful as connecting with a loved one. When you are fully present, the boundaries between self and other, between sacred and ordinary, begin to dissolve. You see that there is no separation between the task at hand and the awareness that performs it. You are not the doer, but the awareness in which the doing takes place. This shift in perspective transforms even the simplest tasks into opportunities for deep connection with the flow of existence. Reflection. The next time you find yourself engaged in an ordinary task, take a moment to bring your full attention to the present moment. Feel the sensations in your body, the movement of your breath, and the simple act of doing. Whether you are washing dishes, folding clothes, or walking outside, allow yourself to become fully absorbed in the moment. Notice how, when you bring presence to the most ordinary tasks, they take on a different quality. The distinction between the mundane and the sacred begins to blur, and you recognize the divine unfolding in every moment. This presence, this awareness, is the key to living in alignment with the truth of oneness. It is through this deep attention to the present that you realize the interconnectedness of all things, that every act, no matter how small, is part of the infinite play of consciousness. The sacred is not something that can be sought or attained. It is something that is always here, waiting to be recognized in the simplicity of your daily life. The dance of stillness and action. As you begin to see the sacredness in ordinary life, you may also notice a new relationship between stillness and action. In the state of oneness, there is no separation between the two. Stillness is the space from which all action arises, and action is an expression of the stillness that lies at the heart of your being. The ego often views action as something that needs to be forced or controlled, something driven by external goals and outcomes. But when you move from the place of presence, action becomes a natural extension of the stillness within you. You are no longer driven by the need to achieve or to fulfill some external measure of success. Instead, your actions arise naturally, guided by the flow of life without attachment to outcome. In this way, life becomes a dance, a continuous interplay of stillness and movement, presence and action. Each moment flows into the next, and you are both the witness and the participant in this dance. The more you surrender to this flow, the more you begin to experience life as an effortless unfolding, where every action is infused with the stillness of awareness. The beauty of the present moment. When you are fully present in life, the beauty of each moment reveals itself. This beauty is not tied to any specific external condition. It is the natural result of being in harmony with the flow of existence. The sky, the trees, the faces of those you meet, all take on a new depth and richness when viewed through the lens of presence. You begin to see that the world around you is not separate from the consciousness that perceives it. This recognition brings a sense of awe and gratitude for the simple act of being alive. The things that once seemed insignificant or routine become imbued with a sense of wonder. The sound of rain, the warmth of the sun, the touch of a loved one's hand, all are experienced as part of the greater tapestry of existence, woven from the same threads of consciousness that make up your being. As you live more fully in the present, you may also find that your relationship with time changes. Time, as the ego experiences it, is linear, always moving from the past to the future, with little attention paid to the present moment. But in the state of oneness, time is experienced as a continuous now. Each moment is complete in itself, and there is no need to rush or grasp for what lies ahead. You live in the flow of time without being bound by it, and this brings a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. Reflection. The next time you feel rushed or overwhelmed by the demands of life, pause for a moment and bring your attention fully to the present. Notice how, in this moment, there is no past or future, only the now. Feel the stillness that underlies even the most active moments, and recognize that this stillness is the source of all your actions. Allow yourself to be fully present, trusting that life is unfolding exactly as it should. Chapter 16. Returning again and again. The journey of awakening is a continuous process of returning to the truth of oneness, returning to the present moment, returning to the source from which all things arise. This process is not linear. It is cyclical, unfolding in waves of remembering and forgetting, of realization and integration. Each time you return to the truth of oneness, the experience deepens. The initial insights of ego death and the realization of your infinite nature become more fully integrated into your daily life. With each cycle of forgetting and remembering, you learn to navigate the world of form with greater clarity, compassion, and presence. The nature of awakening. Awakening is often misunderstood as a single dramatic event, a moment of enlightenment after which everything changes. While there may be moments of profound insight or transformation, the truth is that awakening is an ongoing process. It is a gradual unfolding, a deepening of awareness that continues throughout your life. In this way, the process of awakening is more like a flower blooming than a sudden flash of light. Each petal of understanding unfolds in its own time, revealing deeper layers of truth and wisdom. The ego may resist this slow unfolding, seeking quick solutions or definitive answers. But true awakening cannot be rushed. It requires patience, openness, and a willingness to return again and again to the present moment. The beauty of this process is that each return brings new insights, new perspectives, and new depths of understanding. Even in moments when the ego reasserts itself, or when you feel disconnected from the truth of oneness, you are never truly lost. You are always moving in the direction of greater awareness, even when it doesn't feel that way. The cycles of forgetting and remembering are all part of the greater journey of awakening. Embracing the human experience. One of the most profound realizations that comes with awakening is the embrace of the human experience in all its forms. The ego often seeks to transcend the difficulties and challenges of life, to rise above suffering and imperfection. But the experience of oneness reveals that all of life, the joys and the sorrows, the successes and the failures, is part of the divine dance. To awaken is not to escape the human experience, but to embrace it fully. It is to recognize that even in moments of struggle or pain, there is an underlying current of oneness, a deeper truth that holds everything in perfect harmony. This realization allows you to move through life with grace, accepting the fullness of the human experience without resistance or judgment. In this way, awakening is not about becoming something other than human. It is about becoming fully human. It is about living with an open heart, meeting each moment with presence and compassion, and recognizing the sacredness of every experience. You are not separate from life. You are life itself, expressing itself in the form of a human being. Reflection. As you reflect on your own journey of awakening, consider the moments when you have felt most connected to the truth of oneness. What were the circumstances that led to these moments? How can you bring that same sense of connection and presence into your daily life? Allow yourself to embrace the fullness of your human experience, knowing that every moment is an opportunity to return to the source. Chapter 17. The Infinite Return to Oneness. At the deepest level, the journey of awakening is a journey of returning to yourself, the true self that has always been present, beyond the layers of ego and identity. This self is not limited by time, form, or circumstance. It is the infinite consciousness that animates all of existence, the formless awareness that gives rise to all forms. The experience of returning to oneness is not something that happens once and is then complete. It is an infinite return, a continuous process of remembering and reconnecting with the truth of who you are. Each return deepens your understanding of oneness and brings you closer to living in alignment with the infinite consciousness that is your true nature. The paradox of the journey. The paradox of the journey of awakening is that you are always already home. The destination you seek is not somewhere outside of yourself. It is within you, in the present moment. The experience of returning to oneness is not about going somewhere new or becoming something else. It is about recognizing that you have never been separate from the source. This paradox can be difficult for the ego to accept because the ego thrives on the idea of progress, of moving toward a goal. But the truth of oneness reveals that there is nothing to attain, nothing to achieve. You are already complete, already whole. The journey is not about finding something you lack, but about realizing that you are already what you seek. In this way, the journey of awakening is both a return and a recognition. It is a return to the source, the infinite consciousness that you are, and a recognition that you were never separate from it. This return is not a final destination, but an ongoing process of deepening your awareness of oneness. The eternal dance. As you continue to return to oneness, you begin to see life itself as an eternal dance, a dance between form and formlessness, between self and no self, between separation and unity. This dance is not something to be mastered or controlled. It is something to be experienced with an open heart and a quiet mind. Each moment of life is an invitation to participate in this dance, to witness the play of consciousness as it expresses itself through you and the world around you. Whether you are in the midst of joy or sorrow, success or failure, the dance continues, and you are always part of it. There is no separation between you and the dance, between you and the flow of life. This realization brings a deep sense of freedom. You no longer feel the need to control or manipulate the course of your life, because you understand that you are part of a greater flow, a flow that is infinitely intelligent and always guiding you back to the truth of oneness. The need for resistance falls away, and in its place arises an attitude of surrender and trust. You trust that life is unfolding exactly as it should, that every experience, whether joyful or painful, is part of the process of awakening. You no longer judge these experiences as good or bad, nor do you cling to pleasure or push away discomfort. Instead, you meet each moment with openness, knowing that all of it is part of the divine dance, and all of it is leading you back to yourself. Surrender to the flow. Surrender is the key to living in harmony with the infinite return to oneness. The ego wants to cling to control, to determine the outcome of every situation, to ensure that it gets what it wants. But in the state of oneness, you recognize that the ego's need for control is based on the illusion of separation. When you surrender to the flow of life, you let go of the ego's grasp and allow yourself to be carried by the natural current of existence. This surrender is not a passive resignation, nor is it a sign of weakness. It is an active trust in the intelligence of life itself. It is a recognition that the universe is far more complex and interconnected than the ego can comprehend, and that the mind's attempts to control and manipulate reality only lead to suffering. To surrender is to align yourself with the flow of the universe, to recognize that you are not separate from the source, but an expression of it. When you surrender, you stop resisting what is happening in the moment and allow life to unfold naturally. You become a participant in the dance of creation, rather than an observer trying to direct the steps. In this state of surrender, there is a profound sense of ease and grace. You no longer feel the need to struggle against life's circumstances or to force things to happen according to your will. Instead, you trust that the flow of life is carrying you exactly where you need to be. You may still face challenges, but you meet them with a sense of equanimity, knowing that they are part of the greater process of your awakening. The return to love. At the core of the infinite return to oneness is the return to love. As the ego dissolves and the illusion of separation falls away, what remains is the pure, unconditional love that arises from the recognition of unity. This love is not an emotion that comes and goes based on external circumstances. It is the natural expression of your true nature. In the state of oneness, you see that love is not something you need to seek or create. It is the essence of who you are. This love is not limited to personal relationships or specific people. It is a love that encompasses all of existence. You see that every being, every form of life, is an expression of the same consciousness, and this recognition naturally gives rise to love and compassion. This love is unconditional because it is not based on the ego's desires or preferences. It does not depend on how others behave or whether they meet your expectations. Instead, it arises from the deep understanding that there is no separation between you and others, that all beings are part of the same whole. When you see yourself in others, you cannot help but love them. This return to love transforms your relationships. You no longer approach others from a place of need or attachment. Instead, you meet them with openness and acceptance, recognizing that your connection to them goes far beyond the surface level of ego and personality. You are able to give love freely, without expectation, because you know that the source of love is within you. It is not something that you need to get from others. The end of fear. As you deepen into the realization of oneness, fear begins to dissolve. Fear is rooted in the ego's sense of separateness, in the belief that it is vulnerable, incomplete, and constantly under threat. The ego fears loss, rejection, failure, and ultimately death. But in the state of oneness, you see that these fears are based on illusions. You recognize that you are not the fragile, limited self that the ego believes you to be. You are the infinite consciousness, the awareness that transcends birth and death,